All right, we're going to continue this journey we've been making through the big story of the Bible. And it begins with origin stories, right? The deep questions. Where did we come from? What are we here for? And so last week we began, 2 weeks ago we had creation. Last week we looked at the story of Abraham and how God promised that through him the whole world would be blessed. Today we pick up the story with Abraham's great-grandson, whose name was Jacob. And Jacob then becomes the poster child for dysfunctional families everywhere, right? I mean, sometimes we talk about biblical family values, and I'm not sure what is meant by that, but you're not going to find it in the book of Genesis, that's for sure. Jacob is not an example for us to follow, at least not a positive role model to follow. The story of Jacob, if you're familiar with this, is a story of lying and deceiving and cheating. He cheats his father into giving him the blessing, stealing it from his brother Esau. He has to flee because Esau literally wants to kill him, and he runs back to where Abraham had immigrated from in northern Syria, and he gets a taste of his own medicine by his conniving uncle Laban. And eventually, Jacob turns the tables on Laban, outstays his welcome, and again has to pretty much run for his life. But he has no place to go, so he goes back home, hoping that over the years, his brother has forgotten enough or is willing to forgive him. So that's where our story picks up, Genesis chapter 32. So Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. He instructed them, "This is what you're to say to my lord Esau. Your servant Jacob says, I've been staying with Laban and have remained there till now. I have cattle and donkeys and sheep and goats and male and female servants, and now I'm sending this message to my lord that I might find favor in your eyes." When the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, "We went to your brother Esau, and he's coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." Great fear and distress hit Jacob, and he divided the people who were with him into two groups, the flocks and herds, camels as well. He thought if Esau comes and attacks one group, the other group that's left may escape. And Jacob prayed. He said, "O Lord, my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, Lord, you're the one who said to me, go back to your country, to your relatives, and I'll make you prosper. I'm unworthy of all the kindness, faithfulness you've shown to your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan, but now I've become two camps. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I'm afraid he will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children. But you have said, I will surely make you prosper and make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted." And he spent the night there. From what he had from him, he selected a gift for his brother Esau. The gift he sends is 500 head of livestock, camels and donkeys and sheep and goats, and he sends them all ahead. I'm going to skip that part describing all the gifts and go on to verse 21. Jacob's gifts went ahead of him, but he himself spent the night in the camp. That night Jacob got up, took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, his 11 sons, and he crossed the ford of the Jabbok. And after he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions, and Jacob was left alone. And a man came and wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. The man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go, unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What's your name?" "Jacob," he answered. The man said, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel," which means one who wrestles with God, "because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." He said, "Why do you ask my name?" And he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, which means face of God, saying, "It's because I saw God face to face, yet my life was spared." So again, we've got a name change given in order to signify a change of identity. Jacob, which meant deceiver, is changed to Israel, one who wrestles with God, and becomes a very descriptive name for this man and for the nation that would form from his descendants. But this is just such a bizarre Bible story. I haven't always known what to do with it. When I hear wrestling, I usually think of this, right? Or even worse, I think of this, which is not a terribly helpful image for my spiritual journey. So what do we make of this? This mysterious wrestler is not identified, but in the end, Jacob says, somehow in this stranger he wrestled with, he says, I saw the face of God. Certainly, Jacob would not be wrestling with the creator of the universe and run it to a stalemate, all right? But whoever the struggle was with, Jacob says, I see God in this experience. And I like that metaphor, wrestling with God, to talk about how faith is formed. Certainly was my experience. Growing up, I think I had a pretty simplistic view of faith. I thought it was about just learning the rules and following them, right? If I believe this or memorize that, if the Bible said it, I believe that settles it, then I don't have to think about it anymore. And that worked for me for a little while. But it resulted with me being a pretty judgmental, obnoxious, religious know-it-all, right? Who had no doubts about stuff, but was wrong on just about everything. But as I grew, experienced more of life, I began to wrestle with questions. I knew that God so loved the world so much he gave his son Jesus. And I said, well, why would a God who loved the world that much condemn millions of people to eternal punishment just because they didn't believe the right way, even if maybe they'd never even heard of Jesus? Was that their fault? And I struggled with that. I said, well, I need to make sense out of this. And then my love of history and science challenged how I read Scripture. And I experienced the presence of God in people that others were telling me were abominations. And I says, this doesn't ring true for me. I experienced sort of this dark side of blind obedience and began to second guess lots of things that I thought I knew for sure. Fortunately, I had very patient guides and mentors, people willing to help me, allowed me to ask questions that troubled me and say there's nothing wrong with asking those questions. And it helped me take faith from something I had inherited to something that was really mine. And it's still going on. Faith is not this once and done kind of thing, right? I continue to ask questions, to search, to learn, to grow in faith. There's much not to admire about Jacob. In fact, you could ask, what would Jacob do? And decide to do the opposite and probably do pretty well in life. But I do admire one thing about him. I admire his persistence. Wrestling is hard work. But Jacob didn't give up just because it was hard, right? And it was in this wrestling process that Jacob found blessing. It's in this wrestling process that Jacob experiences the presence of God. I think too often we think of faith as being peace and tranquility. And there's moments when it is. But oftentimes I find God not simply present in sunshines and rainbows, but in the midst of struggles in our life as well. Last week we talked about the transforming power of grace for people who find themselves in deep struggles with addictions. And we talked about 12-step programs a little bit, and how for Abraham the only way he could really get to the promise was by first surrendering, by giving up control, saying, look, I can't do this by myself. And as we look at the story of Jacob, he really embodies these steps all the way along, all right? He has to face his past, in particular, his brother whom he had cheated. He needs to take this honest look, this moral inventory of how he has lived, and then he needs to admit his wrongs and try to make amends. And that's really the story of Jacob. So what happened? Well, let's read on here, chapter 33. Jacob looked up, and there was Esau coming with his 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two female servants. He put the servants and their children in front, then Leah and her children next, and then Rachel and Joseph in the rear. And he himself then went ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. But Esau ran to meet Jacob, embraced him, threw his arms around his neck, and kissed him, and they wept. Esau looked, and he saw the women, the children. He said, "Who are these with you?" Jacob answered, "These are the children God has graciously given to your servant." And then the female servants and their children approached and bowed down. Next, Leah and her children came and bowed down. Last of all, Joseph and Rachel, and they bowed down too. Esau asked, "What's the meaning of all these flocks and herds that I met?" "To find favor in your eyes, my lord," he said. But Esau said, "I already have plenty, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." "No, please," said Jacob. "If I have found favor in your eyes, accept this gift from me. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God, now that you have received me favorably. Please accept the present that was brought to you. For God has been gracious to me, and I have all that I need." And because Jacob insisted, Esau accepted it. So here we have, twice within a 24-hour period, Jacob sees the face of God. Once in the midnight wrestler, the next time in the face of his brother when they found reconciliation. So the question for us then, how do we apply this to our life, is to say, well, where do we see the face of God? I mean, we work at creating an environment of worship when we gather here on Sunday mornings that would encourage an encounter, that we would experience the face of God as we come here. But we know that God's not limited to this building or for the hour that we're here. We know that God is active in the world if we would but see him or recognize him. Wherever there is love or goodness or compassion, there is the face of God. Wherever there is courage and forgiveness, reconciliation, we see the face of God. I'm going to invite our musicians to make their way back up here. There's a song that, one of my favorites, it's called "Travelers on the Journey." It's a song about seeing the face of God in unexpected places. Now the setting for the story is Easter. But see, the disciples don't know it's Easter yet. All they know is that Jesus has been killed. And the grave, there's just silence. And so after 2 days, they decide, we're going to go home. We thought Jesus was going to be the one. We thought this would change everything. But the powers that be took Jesus and they silenced him by putting him to death. And so they said, let's go home. And so that early next morning they got up and they were heading home. And as they traveled, they met a stranger who walked with them. And this stranger talks to them about their grief and their pain. In the process, he begins to talk about the scriptures and reminds them of the stories that go all the way back to Abraham. The stories of how God has been with them through the difficult times as well as the good times. And their hearts are warmed. They're encouraged by this. At the end of the day, they stop and they break bread together and their eyes are open and they recognize the face of God in the stranger who walked with them. And they're overcome by joy.